That's the key to all training. High load, high velocity. I mean, you can't do that any other place except if you drop and catch things, because the reacceleration is you're accelerating 2 pounds. Of course you can. But the crazy part is when you stop it and everything turns on proportionately, that weight doesn't weigh 2 pounds anymore, 3 pounds. You're stopping whatever that equation is. That's the key.
Dan, thank you so much, truly, for being on the podcast. We were talking a little before, and I was explaining to you how I actually found you on Instagram and saw some of the things you were doing, these like altitude drops, the like long eccentrics, you could say long isometrics, long holds, a style that was similar to something I learned and something that changed my life at the University of Hawaii. And since I left Hawaii, I was like, I started what it looks like, and I will hopefully be able to see if there's there's definitely similarities, but where you kind of created your own style. But this style of training that was unconventional. It's not the typical Olympic lifting, and this style of training, like, it really did change my life. And I kept looking for answers when I graduated, because I graduated and then I get thrown into the national team where it's very traditional style lifting overseas, very traditional. And I was like, hey, I'm not doing that. I have this other method, and like, this is what I want to do, and got lots of pushback, lots of like, what are you doing? And we'll dive into a bunch of that kind of stuff.
Yep.
But came across and I literally, in my quest, my hunt for understanding, I was like, who has a method similar? And I was typing in all sorts of like oscillation, long isometric, neuromuscular coordination, like trying to find something that was similar. And I came across you, and now I'm here talking to you, and hopefully here to find some answers. So, dude, Dan, how are you, man?
I'm good. Great to be here. I'm excited to learn a little bit about you and the training you used to do, because I think that's one of the holes in our industry today, is that people don't look at cases like you, that traditional training just wasn't for you, right? And when our people in our profession see that, they're like, oh, no, you have to fit in this box of training. And that's been my whole career, is watching the people on the outskirts go, that's different, but that worked for you. Why did it work? Right. So then that's where I started my research, is everything's different for each person.
And hey, I do want to just to like let people know a little bit about like who you are and what you do, if you don't mind, because I explained a little bit of like how I found you, and like the cool part for me is like, this is our first time meeting and hanging out, so I'm just stoked to learn from you.
Yeah, when I first started in the industry, so I played a little professional football. I played in Canada, played in the Arena Football League. I was always a pretty fast kid. Never really enjoyed weight training. In high school, hardly weight trained. Got to college, I'll never forget. The college strength coach says to me, all right, we're going to bench 2 1/4. How many times can you do it? He 1, 2, 3 hands me the bar, and it fell on my chest. So I was about 160 pound, 5'8" wide receiver that could run 4.5, but I couldn't squat or bench my way out of a paper bag. So then I started weight training, and all of a sudden I got really fast. Like, I was running sub 4.4s, hitting 4.3s. Played my college career with a traditional strength training program and continued to get faster throughout. So I was like, early on when I was young, I was like, okay, I got to get really strong to get fast. So then I started training to go to these combines and try to play professionally. And what I realized was that I got to a certain level of strength and it didn't matter anymore. I couldn't run any faster. So I was like, damn, what's going on here? And I'm a perfectionist. Like, I have to win. I have to be the best. I have to be the fastest. So I started to just screw around with one of the dudes that played football with me. He was a wrestler, and he was just nuts. And we started overspeed training. We started doing all crazy kinds of shit to shock our nervous system. And it was just trial and error back then. And it started working to the point where I was no longer running sub 4.4, 4.3. I was running in the 4.2s and the 4.1s. And I was like, wow, okay, there we go. It's something else. But I also knew that strength played a role. So flash forward maybe 10 years later, I knew that in order for me to run sub 4.3, I had to be able to squat 315, 3 sets of 20, ass to the ground, and that was my marker. Once I got to that level, there was no strength training, zero. And it was all plyometric. It was all over speed. So I stopped playing. I was able to play a few years professionally. That was great. Avoided lots of injuries. So I never really got any major injuries in my career, which, who knows? Maybe that's part of the training. Maybe it's not. And I started coaching and researching and traveling around. And if someone had an idea, I flew to them and just went to find out. Tell me about what you do. And I can't tell you how many times I went to a place and learned and said, nope, that's not for me. That's not what I'm looking for. And then fly to the next place. But that visit wasn't wasted at all, because if I learned why I didn't want to do something, that's just as important as learning what you want. And we just met a lot of great people along the way. And as we talk here, you'll see who's influenced my work. And now I'm trying to give it back too. Like, we're trying to create these. I never was a social media person, but we're trying to create this social media platform where, hey, this is the style that we use. It's been very successful. It's part of, you go someplace and you don't get any better and you wonder why. I think we found some of those answers.
You talk about, like, once you have these kind of markers of strength, and once you hit them, it's like, there's no like really going past that, or that's enough. I find that really interesting because and maybe this isn't exactly the same, but I say this all the time, where it's like let's call it like my max squat. I feel like whether I'm training to increase my max or not at all, it's always kind of around the same, like, especially now having so many years doing different types of training and being so much older, it's like, it's not fluctuating insanely. I'm not going to put 50 kilos or 100 kilos on my squat, nor am I going to lose that by like not doing anything for a month or two. What I found so interesting is with this style of training, I remember working out as a team we did in college, University of Hawaii, like very traditional lifting, your RDL, your squat, some clean, very basic stuff, bench press, all of that. And I remember the summer after I was kicked off the team at Hawaii, for that summer, I met this guy, Daniel Marchong, and I started doing what seems like very similar to the method that you teach, a lot of overspeed stuff, a lot of oscillation, isometric, long isometric with like fast reps, kind of rebounds, more plyometric style training, let's say. Man, I came back, and at the beginning of every year, you do like testing, bench testing, squat. Dude, I came back and blew my numbers and didn't touch a weight over 90 pounds, maybe. Like, no, I wasn't doing any heavy squatting. I wasn't doing any heavy bench stuff. All the bench stuff was like, a lot of it was like push-ups in like a depth position, long isometric holds, like with fast reps. Dude, it blew my mind. I mean, Dan, this is why, like, I'm so, as you can tell, so excited to talk to you, because I was just like, how the fuck? I thought, like, in order to increase strength numbers, you would have to like lift heavy things over and over again. And then I flipped my training completely, did none of the conventional training. And I come back and like blow my numbers out of the water. And I'm just like, how, dude? How?
And that's where my research is still ongoing, is people like you, right? So multiply you by my age and how many times I've seen situations like that. Now, for you, you'll be like, oh, this is the first time that's ever happened to me, and this was awesome. So it sold you. I'm in the process of, I've seen that 15,000 times. So I know that there's something to what we're doing. Instead of saying, well, these 5 guys in this traditional program didn't respond to any of that. And I'm like, well, you push those 5 guys aside. I'm like, why? What's going on? Why did they not respond? Maybe they don't need that shit. So I'm interested to know what your guys' philosophies were and who he learned from, because I guarantee you we crossed paths.
Let me tell you something. This is actually why I brought you on, is because, now granted, this guy, Mar Training, you can check it out. Daniel Marchong is his name. I love him to death. He changed my life. I will forever feel like I'm in some way in debt to him. He was also not he wasn't I was someone who needed to be understood and needed to understand things.
Yep.
And he was a little more like reserved, I guess you could say. I didn't always feel like I could get answers, and he wasn't going to be like, oh, well, this
Yeah.
is not that he didn't help me understand things, but not enough for me to feel like, oh, I got all these concepts, it all makes sense, and I can now teach this or like continue the
Right.
growth. Is kind of like we left, and I wasn't able to do his programs really on the national team, and got so much pushback. I kind of had to like take some of those concepts, and now and I'll talk about this later, how dripping them into being forced into a conventional style of training, more or
Sure.
less.
Yep.
But that's why I'm curious. I know I wanted to say he learned from a guy in China. He is Chinese. I don't know if, let's say it was more of, and I saw this on your site as well. You describe a little more of like an Eastern European philosophy in your training.
Yeah, it's interesting because most of the things that I've learned and have experimented with are from Jay Schroeder. Okay, and I don't know if you know him.
I do
Okay,
know the name. Yep.
so most people will say that Jay Schroeder's stuff is Eastern European, it is Russian, but it really isn't. It's more Chinese, if you
Mm,
can believe that. And that's if
definitely.
you've really jumped into Jay's training. People don't ever get deep enough into it to really understand where it came from. And then
Help,
DB Hammer.
help me out really quick. I know that there's one, you would know him for sure. USC football, dad, son,
Marinovic.
Marinovic.
Yeah.
So Marinovic's style was also very similar to the stuff I was learning from Daniel. And I
Yep.
knew that there was some, that they converged in some way. There was
Crossover.
a
Yeah.
lot.
Sure.
Exactly. So I
And
would
that's
say that
what
was
I
like
am
another
right now.
influence.
I'm like a mutt. There's like probably 4 or 5 people that influenced my training philosophy as it is today. Jay being one. I tell you, Marinovic, yeah, his concentration on the feet and how important they were has a huge. It's not just him. It was 10 other people that inspired the foot in training. And then you throw in DB Hammer, you throw in a bunch of these other guys, and there you have it. You have a system that is designed off of, first, are you in position? Can you hold the correct position? And then in that position, can you absorb force? And it's funny, 20 years ago, people had no problem with the word force absorption. Now all these scientists are like, that's not what we call it. It's something sharing, it's blah, blah, blah. And I say, you know what? It's collision management. If you can teach your body how to collide with the ground, reduce the perceived threat of that, you're going to become a better mover. So threat is the key to all of that.
Yeah, can you just for I can imagine and again, I'm trying my best to represent also the volleyball community who is not as nerdy and super into some of this stuff. Can you describe, I don't know, and maybe as simple or complicated as you'd like, just like what is your style of training and how is it different than just conventional modes of training?
Okay, so draw a circle, and inside that circle is this quote: "You are never going to jump 40 inches in the air if your brain doesn't believe you can land safely from 40 inches in the air." And then around that circle is going to be how we reduce the threat of that perceived thought of the brain. Right? So that's the training. We're trying to convince the brain that it's safe to be able to exert the amount of energy that you're harnessing to be able to jump 40 inches in the air. Because everybody thinks, well, if I continue to jump and continue to jump, you're not going to get any better. You might be able to jump up on a box and pull your hips up a little bit higher or your knees up a little higher. That's not displacing your center of gravity. You're going to truly learn that when you land, and you can land in a perfect position and your body feels and your brain feels safe. Then it's going to give you the energy to jump 40 inches.
That's super interesting.
So in my training, you will never see somebody jump up on a box. Hardly ever, until they're very well trained and they understand exactly how to get into position to absorb that. So if you watch any jump in volleyball, any jump in basketball, any jump, to me, falling out of the air and you're sprinting is a collision management. You're hitting the ground. Sure. Gravity's pulling you at a constant. You have to be able to manage that collision and not deform joints and tissue and all that stuff to get an elastic response. So there's always a counter movement. It's how well you handle that counter movement, what you're prepared to handle, and how fast you can make it happen to reverse it, right? So we spend a lot of time, and you said it earlier, altitude drops. That's probably 80% of our program. We get into a lot of different positions, and then we fall and stop ourselves.
And that is also, I mean, you described it almost like coming down from a box, but I remember, and again, I don't mean to put your training and the stuff I learned in the same box. I do think there's a lot of similarities, and so I'm going to speak from that, and you just filter me out when I'm not with you there. But I remember doing even the altitude drops with shoulder stuff, with different positions. It wasn't even just every time like jumping from a box, you know?
Sure.
And
Everything,
I thought that was
everything can absorb force. Everything, every body part. If you look at, and I've never seen the EMGs behind this, but if you look at, let's say someone serves the volleyball and it's coming at you and you're getting your platform ready to put the ball up into the air. When that ball hits you, that's a collision, right? So everything in your upper body is going to turn on proportionately. So I started thinking, we should train like that. So if I catch a falling object, every muscle in my upper torso turns on proportionally at the same time. That's what you want to happen in sport. So we started to devise training methods of we altitude drop everything, every position, we drop weights, everything. And if you can stop that and show the brain, hey, look, I'm stable here, I'm good, the reoccurring force that's going to leave you is going to be way higher.
First of all, I love the explanation you gave in the very beginning. That makes it like finally like something that I resonate with, that makes it feel really clear. And there's so much more to explore outside of that circle, which is really cool. I can imagine it's your job. Like that's the most fun part, I bet, is figuring out what works for people, what doesn't. And
right.
What I guess I think in my head sometimes, I'm going to play a little bit of like the devil's advocate or try to think from the conventional style, because I want so much to really understand, you know?
Sure.
And I think all the time it's like, for example, you talked about how it's similar to like in sport, in volleyball, in passing a volleyball. And you're totally right. You're totally right in the example you gave. And I can imagine the thought is, and I've heard this before, where it's like, why would we do like plyometric rebound, that kind of training, when that's what sport specifically, that's what a lot of volleyball is. And that's a lot. I remember when I brought it in with the national team, I got so much pushback where it's like, you don't need to be training more plyometric, more, I hate to say like absorb and produce force, because that's a lot of things, but like, you know, that like plyometric style, like why do that type of training when that is your sport?
So my answer to that is then you need long duration isometrics. You don't need, if you take the barbell squat and you just perform a squat, it's the neural inverse of jumping, right? So when you go up in the squat with loaded weight, if you look at the EMG, if you look at any of the muscles, everything's slowing down. There's no toe off. There's no toe off velocity, zero. So it's the exact opposite. As you're going up, you're slowing down. Right? That's why I don't believe resisted jumps are great for you, because it's the complete neural inverse of what you're trying to do. We're trying to release that energy through toe off. That never happens in weight training unless you're jumping with it, but they're still slowing down. So what I used to do was we would take bands, attach bands to a belt, stand up on the plyometric box, take the bands, pull them down, have one person step on one person step on the other, right? So I've got two bands hanging off my waist going down at an angle. They pull you down off the box, you land, and then I pick my foot up off the bands. So you've taken all that eccentric velocity, pulled it down, and then I let it go, and you can jump without any resistance. That's a true vertical jump, because you want to be able to harness the eccentric and then toe off. We don't do that in conventional lifting.
And I guess, you know, like then what is the, when you think about people talking about like force production and how it's like so much of it is based on your 1 rep max, and there's different ways of working along that, like a pendulum, let's say.
Yeah.
And the how it's been thought to me is it's like, okay, let's say volleyball is a lot of, let's call it plyometric. Let's take the sport away and let's
Yeah.
say it's a lot of plyometric training.
Hmm.
The thought process that I've been told is like, then the gym and the weight room is more like protective and adding balance. We're doing a lot of like your own body weight here, and
Sure.
here we're doing more heavy. Like, what do you think about that?
I think that they're on the right track, but from a neurological standpoint, they're not meeting the equation. So what you have to look at is the anterior part of the body instead of the posterior part. That's number one. And number two is, again, the simple definition of strength training is not going to be able to withstand strengthening those things, because in high velocity motion, your muscular system is more of a stabilizer than it is a driver of movement. The tendons drive the movement. Okay. So being able to do isometric training to support the stress on the tendons, and what's his name? Keith Barr has done a ton of stuff on tendon research. So look him up. He's freaking brilliant when it comes to that. But I'm more concerned at the tendons, because that's our sport. If your tendons and ligaments are able to absorb and release, the muscular system is there to stabilize at those speeds. So I tell sprinters the same thing. Your muscular system doesn't do shit for you to propel you down the track. It stabilizes you at those high speeds. So yes, they have the right idea of, yeah, some people need to get stronger to be able to jump higher, but you better be doing that correctly or you're going to have unintended consequences. Because from a reflex standpoint, which is mostly plyometric work, is reflexive in nature, in harnessing that, you are dulling your reflexes. You are dulling your reflexes when you are strength training. And I'm not saying I don't squat, kids. I certainly do.
Sure.
But I understand that there's an unintended consequences attached to that, and we better address it. Nobody addresses it. They just do the strength training and go, you're going to get the plyometric work by playing. Well, that sounds great on paper, but you're forgetting the neural component.
And yeah, you bring up the like the neural component, the neuromuscular system as like a big part of it. And I remember like for example, we mentioned before the podcast a little bit, like this neuromuscular coordination. Actually, I don't know what the machine is called, and again, I've never been able to find them except for when I was working at Daniel's place. But it's like, can you describe it? I don't want to try to butcher describing this machine.
So he had an inertial impulse machine.
Which is where the weight sat here, and then if there was any slack in the rope, it would kind of like tighten, and you have to basically. And for those listening, and for those listening to like how I use it now, because obviously like that machine is, I can imagine, expensive and clearly not easy to find.
Right.
But it's not in your crunch gym, let's say.
Right.
And I use like a band, for example, and it's this idea of like, let's say I'm doing it for like my adductors or something, and I tie a band to a pole, and then I step out a little bit so there's tension, and I'm trying to constantly keep tension but not have the band pull me. It's like I'm actually the one controlling the force in both directions.
Yeah, the timing of it is critical.
Yeah, and it is so like your coordination. And when I, like, for example, with kids I work with, like when I start introducing some of this stuff, and I'll never forget the first time I was ever on that machine, like feeling like a freaking idiot, dude.
Yeah.
But I just saw so much value in this idea of coordination, and then when you put like a well-tuned athlete on this kind of machine, it's like they're like a baby again.
Yep. So what ends up happening, so Franz Bosch in his motor learning stuff and all his stuff, he's figured that part out, the coordination part of strength training, right? So if I get a kid who comes into my gym who's a big weightlifter, I'll put him on that machine and he can't even move it. It's and it stops. And he looks at me and he's like, the machine's broke. I'm like, no, it's not. And I take him. And inertial training is the more weight you take off of it, the harder it is.
Yeah,
think about
sure.
that, right? So the more weight I put on to teach somebody how to move, you can feel the eccentric, concentric, you can feel the timing, then you get it, and you can only move it so fast because your timing can only catch up so much. Then as you start to take the weight off, it teaches you how to contract to the same point you are relaxing, which is sport, right?
Exactly,
you have to be able to relax the antagonistic muscles to be able to throw it hard. And I always use, and I would imagine this is the same for volleyball. So if you're
Exactly the
hitting the
same.
ball overhead, right, and everybody's focused on all these muscles to be able to do that, the reality of the situation is the muscles that turn on to stop your arm, if they can relax to the same extent that your arm is driving forward, then you're going to have high speed hits. And then there's the threat process. If your brain doesn't believe that the timing is accurate enough to turn these muscles on to stop your arm from flying off, it's going to say, whoa, big boy, you're not moving that fast.
Yeah.
Once you trick it and you say, now I know the timing, it's going to let you have all kinds of energy.
So to talk about the, oh God, I don't want to, antagonist,
Yep.
that's the opposite.
Yep.
Right?
Antagonist is the opposite.
For example, in the shoulders, like when I worked with Daniel, we did tons of scapular pull-ups. Scaps. And even in like, for example, and I recently posted a video about like a high-speed eccentric where you're kind of leaning forward, you're at 90 degrees, it's more for your rotator cuff, let's say. But all that, like where you have like in this example on my Instagram page, I drop like a 2 kilo, 1.5 kilo ball. I drop it, but I attack it. And in the same feeling of like, first you have to attack it. The second you make contact, pull it up as quick as you can back into that position. And I remember when we were doing those, he had a huge focus on keeping the scap engaged the whole time and not letting it loose. Would a part of that be because that is the decelerator of the shoulder?
Oh, absolutely. So what you just described to me is what I try to get this through to strength coaches that are stuck in the weight room. And I'm like, okay, so you're taking something that weighed, I don't know, I don't know kilograms, so I'll say 2, 3, 4 pounds.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Okay.
And you are stopping it. Well, when it stops, and I have this this graph that somebody in a lab created for me of the forces that you're creating, the impact forces that you're creating when you drop something and you stop it. So that 3-pound weight, when it drops and it accelerates to the ground at 32 feet per second or 9.8 meters per second squared, is way more when you catch it and stop it than it was up here at 2 pounds, right? So now you're training high load, you're training high velocity, and you're training high volume. That's the key to all training. High load, high velocity. I mean, you can't do that any other place except if you drop and catch things, because the re-acceleration is you're accelerating 2 pounds. Of course you can. But the crazy part is when you stop it and everything turns on proportionately, that weight doesn't weigh 2 pounds anymore, 3 pounds. You're stopping whatever that equation is. That's the key. And that's why it's fantastic.
And I just want to add on that too, not to interrupt you.
Yeah.
I think the other part that I really loved about this style, I'm going to say your style of training.
It's not mine. It's a mutt mix.
You're right. But something that you preach, and I love you for it. Truly, that I found someone like you. Really, it's making my day. I think the other part was this concept of intent, and there was so much of the work that we did. You were so intentional because it wasn't just like, I have a bunch of weight on my back and I'm going to focus on a 3-second count eccentric and then come up fast. It's like, it was, you had to be so focused on what you were doing. You weren't just sitting there and like dropping the ball and like catching it. It's like, you were really focusing on boom, hit it. That's the first part. And we broke all those things down, right? Into like more, starting with kind of long isometrics, then like slowly adding it to more high speed and just then focusing on more like longer rep schemes, but longer rep schemes as compared to just
Jay Schroeder guy. I guarantee it. I guarantee it.
Well, he I don't know if he learned from him, but it does seem like there's a lot of correlation for sure with that kind of stuff. But again, I just think it's so fascinating, and I would love for you to talk a little bit on this concept of intent. And because to me, I mean, that was the real thing. The same with the coordination, right? It's like you're not just there doing 3 sets of 50 with let's even say like a rotator cuff exercise with a band or with that machine, and you're just like kind of casually. You can't casually do shit like you can casually do shit in a weight room where it's like, okay, take this weight like and hold it here, hold it to your sides and do like just go out or go up here. It's like that shit is like there's no intent. And I know with professional players I've played with for a long time, guys get bored. They're not focusing. They're just doing the weight. They're talking. Like you can't do that with this kind of work.
100%. So your brain, number one, needs a target. If there's not a target or intent behind it, it's not interested in learning it, right? So it's going to go through everything to keep you safe that you're normally with. So you said to me earlier, my squat is what it is. It never goes really up, or it never really goes really down. It stays right around the same. And if I had to squat this, I probably could. And because your brain's not afraid of it anymore, it's completely part of whatever you want to do, whenever you want to do it, right? You have to constantly challenge it, constantly. So when you drop that falling load, the brain's like, oh shit, what's going to happen next? And now there's rhythm. Now there's timing. Now there's that coordination piece. And then there's the proprioceptive of, where am I stopping it? Is it connected in my space of surrounding of where? Because if you think about it, most people can't hit a golf ball or a baseball because they have no idea where that damn thing's going to be. So the brain's like, oh shit. The coordination plays such a role in that. And I don't think people truly understand that. And going back to those weight room guys, they're just desensitizing that part of your brain. That's what happens with weight training. I don't care how you do it. That's what it does. So you're controlling the reflexive part, and it's fantastic. You drop stuff and move stuff with intent. Oh shit. And holding the right position. It's great to do do something. And if you're out of position, how are you ever going to make that translate? Like I heard somebody talk about Michael Jordan's jump shot, and they took all the video of all his jump shots. Oh, he falls off balance. He's so incredible. But if you take a look at the last part, when he shoots the ball, he's in the exact same position all the time. It doesn't matter where his feet are, where his body is, blah, blah, blah. His last, before he releases the ball, and I would imagine this would be the same for any sport, is going to be exactly the same, because that's a stabilizer in training. That is what Franz Bosch calls an attractor. Those things have to remain the same as the environment around you changes. So when your coach was telling you stay in this position, make sure the scap is in this position, because he knows that when you get into any sport, forget volleyball, forget basketball, human movement, if you want to be able to move explosively, your scap needs to be in this position.
Can you talk about that? I know you had that on your site as well, this
Yep.
idea of like, I don't know if I have the quote, but it was something along the lines of like, you train, correct me here, like human movement and not like sports specific movement. And really quickly, I do want to say one thing on top of this. The part I'm interested in also is, it's the same kind of idea with like squatting, right? Where the classic squat is like push your knees out, so your knees don't buckle in. And I've always been so fascinated because as someone who's studied heavily volleyball and playing it at the highest level, I've also noticed, like, for example, when I land from a block, a lot of times it's very different. Sometimes I land on 2 feet. Sometimes it's 1 foot. Sometimes it's 1 foot falling. Like there's all these like little nuances in the way I land. And then I have, a coach telling me, well, this is the way you're supposed to squat. And I'm like, really? Because when I jump, it's in a ton of different positions.
Right.
So help me understand this concept of like having some, let's call them foundational positions, which we did have in that style of training. And then the chaos of life and sport and nature.
Okay. So what you look at in terms of foundational stuff is things that have to do with locomotion, right? So there's 2 patterns. And again, this is where in my research, different systems of pain management, different systems of therapy have kind of folded into my belief system. So square one, I don't know if you've heard of square one.
Wait, quickly, can you just explain locomotion for those who might not know what that is?
Yeah, so the simple gait pattern. If I'm walking, my right arm is coming forward as my left leg is extended, right? So, I mean, we are contralateral beings. We are designed to walk, right? Most weight room training is bilateral movement, okay? So if your training isn't moving towards being unilateral and or gait specific, you're probably doing something wrong. Now, base level rudimentary motor patterns, there is a sit to stand pattern, which would be our squat. However, that quickly changes once we have locomotion. When there's locomotion, now we're on one leg. So you have to be able to understand those positions, gait positions, which is single leg stance, which is being able to be single leg stance while my opposite arm is doing something else. And we have to be able to understand the sit to stand pattern, because then that turns into change of direction. That turns into your lateral glutes being the stabilizer when you land on one foot. So your hips not flowing out, your ankles not rolling over. So teaching those positions without heavy up and down movement of loaded weight is way more efficient than teaching something and saying, hey, we're going to load the back squat. I mean, most people's standing posture is so fucking horrible that why would I load something? Well, I mean, you load something, you're going to make it worse. So before you teach them any type of weighted motion, let's make sure I stand correctly and my eyes and my feet are interacting with the horizon correctly to set my posture. So once the vehicle starts moving, it feels safe. We don't ever do that. We're more concerned with let's load as much weight up on our back as possible. That's why you get guys that they can't squat, or the guys who squat the most in the world don't jump the highest.
Yeah,
ever.
otherwise bodybuilders would have insane verticals.
Shit, power lifters would be able to jump out of the gym. There's very little correlation. Very little.
Man, I'm trying my best, like, not to get, dude, I'll be honest, when I learned this style of training and got forced into a conventional style of training, I was straight up mad. I was mad. And to this day, it's been like, finally, I like almost gave up on it, or actually now rather, I've learned from so many different arts of strength and conditioning, let's say, that I've kind of cultivated what is rightfully my own in some way, or wrongfully, who knows? But like, for example, with just getting so much pushback, and I just want to know, like, why is it that like people get these degrees and then they all end up just doing the same shit? And they like, I loved even your thought about like just feeling like you can constantly evolve and learn. Like, why is the ego so heavy in the strength and conditioning world?
I don't know. I'm going to be honest with you, because I've seen it. Like, it's amazing. Like, I have people that I've mentored for years, and then I go watch them train and I'm like, what are you doing? I never told you that. But then they're giving me feedback. Oh, what you're doing is great. Blah, 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 blah. But you're not doing that. And that's why you're having the same injuries. That's why you're having the same plateaus. I don't understand it. But I think it's once you learn something and you feel confident in what you've learned, I think people are very afraid of venturing out and saying there could be. I remember Douglas Heel. Have you ever heard of Be Activated or RPR?
No.
Okay, so look up RPR and look up Be Activated and look up Douglas Heel. Okay, he created a system that is it's performance based mostly, but he was a therapist, and what it is basically working off certain reflexive points in your body, stimulating them to make muscles, behave better.
Are you talking about like electrical stimulation of some kind?
No, but I've
No.
done that too. But
Have
yes.
you ever used like an ArpWave?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I don't know if we need to get into that right now, or how familiar you are with that, but dude,
How
that
familiar?
machine.
I was probably the first one to use it in the United States.
Yeah, then let's talk about it, dude. Okay, for those of you who don't know, please explain a little bit what the ArpWave is, and I'm not
It's
like
a direct
pushing
current.
this on.
Yep.
Okay.
It's a direct current that's wrapped in an alternating current that allows full electric stimulation eccentrically. So you're still allowed to move while it's on you, which most conventional stim machines, like Russian stim and all that, you cannot move. Once that muscle's contract, it locks. Right. You're allowed to move on the ARP. And again, the key to life is movement, right? So they figured out that if I can have these electrical signals going through your body while you're moving, you can accelerate healing more than any modality I've ever seen.
Dude, you know what? I am on your back on this one, dude. Like, I cannot tell you how many times I've seen, and even like, look, we used it from a training aspect. Like, I would put it on my calves and do jumps. I would do. So
he's Jay Schroeder trained, 100%. Your guy, 100%.
He would hate to be boxed by anything. I'll tell you that much. Put in any box. But yes, it sounds like, and this is cool. These are great names for people to go research. And I myself am gonna, like, I've opened the box again, so I'm gonna keep diving into it. Yep. But with this ArpWave, I also saw like guys would get in volleyball. It's pretty. You'll see a lot of ankle sprains, and I mean, I remember there was one where you'd put the
in a
red
bucket of water.
in a bucket of water. Dude, I saw guys come back from, and again, is it just that? I don't know, but dude, I saw guys come back from that
30 years
so quickly. And you know what I don't understand? Why is ArpWave not like their branding is terrible? Like no one's like promoting any of their shit. And to me, it was like, yo, that device, in my opinion, was like pretty life-changing for all the other, modalities, foam rolling, like even the plate vibrations, which we did a ton of stuff too as well. And I think there's some benefits to that as well. But like of all the things that I've used, that, and then there's another machine called Vasper, which I don't know if you're familiar with. We don't.
Tell me what that is.
Oh, God damn it. We're going down some rabbit holes here. But Vasper is basically these, it's VASPR, and it's basically like cold packs. And you put a cold pack around.
Cold, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, you put a cold pack around your biceps. You put a cold packs around your quads and hamstrings.
It's got to be your subscap area where there's brown adipose tissue, right? That's where you want it.
We had it on our like around our arms and around our legs, and it's basically like a compression cold pack. And you're on like a seated bike where basically, like I'm sure for those of you listening, like aerodynes, where you're like pushing, like pushing and pulling with your hands and pushing and pulling with your feet, like you're on a bike.
Cross crawl.
Exactly. And we would use it post workout. And the research is like super interesting in this concept of like inducing more human growth hormone like naturally in your body. I'll tell you this, when we used it, I slept like a fucking baby.
Sure you did. That's why cold immersion works. I mean, if you think about now, again, this is what I love about doing these things is people begin to connect dots. And I think, when somebody says to me, where do you figure yourself in the strength and conditioning? I'm like, I just have been exposed to so many different ways of training that I'm able to connect the dots better than anybody because I've seen it, all of it. So the cold immersion and why people, when the research first came out, they're like, it doesn't, ice doesn't help injuries, right? That's where we're at right now. I'm like, great. I don't ice injuries. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested that cold is primordial. Man, if you're not cold adapted, you're limiting yourself physically. So that's a whole different topic. But yeah, the ARP machine is one of those tools that comes along once in a lifetime. We won't get into how they market it or what they do because that's a whole.
Hey, if you're listening, you're definitely not like sponsor me, bro. I reached out to them. I was like, dude, let me be someone to promote it. Cause it actually changed my life. It had an impact on me. And I was just like, please, like, let me help spread the word of your machine. Cause I know they have the heavy duty ones that are definitely a little more on the expensive side. And they also have the like pocket version.
The training one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have a really prominent ACL doctor in the area. And I own a gym, and attached to that gym is a place called Pittsford Performance Care. That's what my hat says, right? So they are all neuro-trained by Carrick, and it just goes hand in hand with what we do in the gym. And when the docs first came in to see my gym, I've had hundreds of chiropractors come in and say, I want to be part of what you do. I'm like, well, I simply don't believe what you do. So it's hard to create a business together. So this one guy came in, Dr. Lucky, who's still working there now. And he said, tell me what you do. I explain it to me. So I'm like, here's what you need to do. Fly out to Minnesota, talk to my guy, Dr. J. And from a neurological standpoint, you'll start to understand what we do, where the train of thought is. So he went out there. He spent 2 days out there. He comes back and he goes, okay, well, now I know why you don't take any normal chiropractors in here. He goes, my whole paradigm has changed. This is crazy. So I had the ARP at the time, and I put it on him, and I showed him how it works, which I'm going to be honest with you. The people who have it in this country don't use it right. They don't use it right. Right. So then the ARP gets a bad name. Oh, this hurt this person, or did that, or didn't work here. So he's been using it in his practice now, and it's a game changer. It's ridiculous. It's not even worth me telling you some of the things that we've treated, because people will be like listening, going, yeah, okay, bullshit. But
and we can maybe talk more. I hope this kindles more of a friendship relationship in the future. I would love to pick your brain more on that as well. And I'll tell you this, and not that in any way being sore is a direct correlation of like how hard you worked or how, and in fact, a lot of times it can mean overtraining to some degree. And, but I'll tell you this, dude, we used to strap that on my calves, and do jumps, and I was sore for like a fucking week, like on the third or fourth day, like maximum soreness.
It'll buckle you.
That's for
Absolutely.
sure.
Yep.
So
I had someone come in the gym the other day and just visiting, has been back from college. He went to USC, comes back and he goes, Coach, I've never seen the training. Like I used to strap a backpack to him and we used to go out to the track and run with it on. And that would be the only way he could train around his injury that he had. And we would get these perfect training days with that machine on. So yeah, go ahead.
Can you speak a little more on like injury prevention? Because just to be clear, and I got to keep in mind my best, like bring in the volleyball community here with me.
Yeah.
I'll say this really quickly. The difference between, maybe we go here, like the difference between off season and in season training, like this type of work specifically in off season, I found so valuable because also we did so many of the things that we did in the gym were, to your point, exactly like in sport, exactly like, and volleyball specifically, because volleyball is a non-contact sport. It's you and gravity, really, you know? And I found that direct correlation was like so much more direct than like me in the off season doing like a month of eccentric training, you know, and then a month of isometric. How do you balance like off season work with, now we're in season? And for like the hard part for me has been, I'm in season year round because I go from 8 months playing professionally straight into that national team gym, and now we're competing around the world.
Yeah. To me, it's the exact same thing, except the volume is a little bit different. You still have to manage positions. You still have to be able to absorb energy and see where there's kinks in the army or in the armor. And you have to be stimulating your brain, giving it targets, giving it new challenges. So you have to be able to get your cerebellum more active. Okay. Because when you're doing regular conventional strength training, it desensitizes your cerebellum. So
can you describe that a little more?
Yeah. So anytime I'm doing a bilateral movement, anytime, it's going to give your brain a hesitation in terms of how fast you can turn your muscular system on. So here's what I want you to do. If wherever you are in the next couple of days, shoulder test somebody, right? Press your hands down, tell them, resist me. Don't let them press down. Okay. You'll get a good lock of the muscle for the most part, right? Tell them to do 10 squats. Try it again. They'll be desensitized for about a minute or two where they can't create the force that they want to, just because that bilateral motion isn't something the brain likes. It likes that contralateral.
That's so interesting.
Gait, right? So then you walk, come back, do it, it's back on again. Because the brain likes gait. And if you don't feed it gait in your training, and no matter what you're doing, and again, that could be as simple as supination and pronation. It could be as simple as staggering how many times when you jump, and you told me this earlier, do you jump with your feet perfectly like this? They're probably like
almost
this.
Never. Almost never. Yeah.
Right. So because your brain enjoys this, it does not enjoy this. I know it gets kind of crazy. It gets crazy.
Well, it gets crazy, but then, you know, a lot of this stuff to me is it's logical, right? It's being like, that's how we evolved. We're, you know, locomotive beings, as you described.
But that's why people can't stand it. Like when they hear it, like these strength coaches, they're like, it's logical, but they're like, no, that can't be that easy. Well, it is.
Well, I think the pushback that I've gotten the most as someone who's been like, let's say, promoting for this style of work and constantly getting, oh my God, dude, you should see, and I'm lucky enough. I love Tim Pellet, our strength and conditioning coach with Team USA. He's such a great guy. But we differ in some ways for sure, but that's a separate thing. I love him. And, but I bring this style of training overseas in Poland. Oh my God, when I was in Italy, and they were just like, get the fuck out of here with this. What are you doing? Right. You know? And luckily for me, it's like what I've been lucky enough, I feel like, to earn strength and conditioning coaches' trust, let's say, because I'm so unlike most athletes who are just like, what's that? Give me the sheet and let me just like half-ass most of it. I was like all in on like, let's try this. Let's try this. But it's been the hardest thing in my career to be like, let me do this.
Yep. Just let me go and just watch it. And then give me your feedback on it. It's like, that's why the guy who runs my gym for years has been telling me, just put this stuff out there and let people see it. I'm like, well, when I was younger, I didn't mind getting in arguments with people. I loved it. Like, let's talk, because you're not going to win, because what you do is terrible. And then I realized that doesn't really sell anything. So I'm like, all right, so we're slowly putting this stuff out. So like our Patreon page and Instagram stuff, we're putting it out there, and people are emailing me and going, you know what, this makes so much sense. But, and then don't be afraid to try it. Just sprinkle it in, and then you'll start to see that it's way better than what you are doing. And
let me say this to just keep hyping up what you do. Especially for those maybe kids or people who, COVID hit, right? And when COVID hit, it was like, I don't have access to a gym anymore. What I low-key loved about, I was like one of the few players that was like, I've trained my whole life for this, bro. Like, you don't need 200, 300 pounds to get better at your sport, to get faster,
what's crazy?
To get stronger.
That's when my business picked up the most.
I can imagine.
I've never done online stuff before because nobody was interested. But I'm like, you got nothing to train with? Guess what? Come train with me. I'll make you better with nothing.
100%. And like so much of the stuff you talked about, altitude drops, like some of the oscillation, the long duration isometrics, like
the quick style stuff. I'll take a towel and paralyze you. It's unbelievable. We use a towel and people are like, this is ridiculous. I'm like, if you just understand position and what your muscles are intended to do, and then let your brain do it, it's crazy what happens.
Let's talk about a little bit. Well, just to finish that thought, just for kids and stuff, this is why I think it's so good. Go check out what you're doing, WannaGetFast, because what I love so much about it is that, like, all you would really, you could use like a couple bands, maybe even like I've taught people how to like create that like ball for some of those for shoulder stuff. Like, sure, 2 to 5 pounds, I'll crush you with 2 to 5 pounds, dude. Like you said, like absolutely. And I just think that, like, not that this is for kids, but when I think about like, how do you start getting the younger generation to start thinking about movement and wanting to train? I have those kids that I work with one-on-one, and I kind of supplement them some workout stuff and different ideas. And I'm always like, this is the first place I go, because I know that they're going to go to college and they're going to have to learn how to clean and squat and do these basic movements. But I'm like, I want to build them a foundation, a way that I actually think is a lot safer, and absolutely crushed me. Like, dude, so much of that stuff in like such a healthy way, I think. And so much of that to me is just like, that's why this method is just like, I think it's fantastic. It's logical. And there's just, you don't need, well, if you're someone who doesn't have access to go to a gym like yours, or to go get the online, it's like, you don't need a ton. Yeah. And I wanted to talk about some of those like foundational positions you discussed. For me, when it came to like overhead stuff, the scap, like having that scap locked and engaged, was like a huge part of it. I saw on your the reverse Nordics. I always get confused. Nordics. Yeah. The Nordics, and then that lunge position were like the same. Like, that was our base, Can you talk about specifically that lunge position? And especially, you hear kids now with like knees over toes, and granted, I'm someone who takes a little bit of everything, and maybe I drip it in my warm up and like different things. And I'm going all over the place. I do want to say too, when I trained with Daniel, we never did like a warm up. It was like sometimes the leg warm up was like a part of, and we did like in that lunge position, that like elongated lunge position, we did like 10-second isometric, 3 to 5 reps, depending on whatever, with like some dumbbells, 10-second, 3 to side, 10-second, 3 to 5. And that was one round, switch feet. And we did that. That was our style that we did a ton. And to build up to that, you do like the slow eccentrics, you do the longer isometric. There was so many different ways to drip in some fun there.
All right. So what question am I answering? The positions.
So I'm a nightmare, dude. I'm sorry.
A lunge position is exactly what it sounds like. It's a lunge position, but we're in the game of activating certain muscles at the right time. So you are the first person, I think, in any of the podcasts I've done that describe it's an extreme slow eccentric. It's not an isometric. It looks like there's no motion, but there's always motion. Okay. So we get down into what we think is our end range of motion in a lunge. Once we're in that position, with the front leg, we're pulling ourselves into position with our hamstring. The back leg, we are eccentrically elongating that hip flexor as I'm driving the big toe through the ground. Okay. So I have front leg pushing or pulling. I have the back leg pushing and elongating. And while I'm doing that, I'm pulling myself down farther and farther. Now, that motion in 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 10 seconds is this much, but it's motion. It's going down the entire time. And that intent to constantly pull yourself into the ground is the magic behind those exercises. So no matter what you are doing, there has to be intent of pulling yourself into the ground, whether it's a squat, whether it's a one-legged squat, a skater lunge. Those are the ones that we use because it takes care of all different kinds of movement, right? So a skater lunge where I have one leg crossed behind the other is our change of direction, isometric, eccentric. Single leg stuff, gate stuff. And then the upper body is simply an iso push-up, right? So if we're into this position, right? That somebody says to me, well, bench pressing and all this stuff doesn't have anything to do with baseball or volleyball. And I'm like, what is this position if I'm throwing something? What did you just do? Turn around, drop that hand a little bit. That's an iso push-up right there, if I've ever seen one, right?
Yeah.
So again, I'm throwing the ball. Pitchers shouldn't bench press. Well, that's because you teach it wrong. This looks like a bench press to me.
Well, and the thing, like, here's what I want to say too is, and this is what and to what I was saying before, that like every position, like if you see, for example, one of your videos and you see a kid in like, or an athlete that you have that's in a lunge and you think, oh, he's just in a lunge position. And what I remember is I'm like, oh no, dude, it's so much more. There's a big learning curve in coordination of that ability exactly to drive through the floor with that front foot. So you're, for us, it was like engaging the hamstring, I forget, reciprocal something.
Yeah. So you're lengthening the quad as you're pulling from the hamstring. So now as you go down, that muscle's lengthening instead of becoming the brake and turning on like this, right? So it's again, it's 1 foot on the gas. That's great. Conventional strength training is 1 foot on the gas, 1 foot on the brake. So you're going really fast, but it's terrible for your muscles. Whereas in this style of training, it's 1 foot on the accelerator, relax that brake. And now we're going faster.
And yeah, and I feel like that style of training, the same with the push-up, right? It's like, you're not just in a push-up, you're actively almost like trying to push yourself out of it, but you're not. Like it's so much more active. There's so much more going on in your brain. And that's why we started our Patreon pages, because I'm explaining exactly how we do all these things. That's really cool.
And why it's not just what you see on Instagram. Oh, it looks really cool, or you've never seen. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into that before we even start doing that. And half the time we post those videos, I'm calling my guy going, can we change that position, please? That's awful. We need to go back. And but again, I couldn't sell programs or have people in my gym if all we did was hold positions, right? They'd be like, that doesn't work. Like, people would call me on the phone and go, oh my God, my son is so fast. Thanks for working on him on his running form and everything. I'm like, we've never run once. Not once. Not once. Well, how did his form change? That's why you don't know what you're talking about. So it changed now because we've been doing these isometrics. He understands position. He understands what muscles are supposed to be doing, the timing, all that stuff. Once he's strong enough, in my mind, to run, then we start running. And then you'll see it change.
And what's the thought process with like a lot of the work is like end range. So to your point, right? It's not everything. We did stuff. You are doing full range. Like when you do those extremely slow eccentrics or whatever, like in that lunge position, and you're going down for however many 10 seconds or even, longer than that, you are getting the full range. But a lot of that work, a lot of the oscillation stuff was like in that kind of end range.
Because once you start communicating antagonist muscles at that point, there's a lot of learning going on at that position. So they've done research on isometrics, on joint position isometrics, and what gives you the biggest bang for your buck. And extreme ranges of isometrics give you range through a full motion, gives you strength through a full range of motion. So we know that extreme isometrics are great in terms of building strength throughout the range of motion. My thing is it completes the entire reflex arc of the movement. So once you are in the end position, the brain knows how to fill in the rest when it comes to human movement, right? You just teach at the end, it'll give you the between.
Can you explain also what extreme isometric is for those listening?
Yeah, so an extreme isometric is what we were talking about before. It looks like there's no movement at all. So you are in a lunge, your knee is about a half an inch off the ground, your torso is perfectly upright. You are in a lunge position with your legs as far apart as you can get in order to get your knee right over your shoelace. But while you're in that position, there are certain things being activated. Like we talked about, front foot hamstring, right? We're pulling into the ground as if I was running and my foot is doing this. The back foot is lengthening as it's pushing into the ground with the big toe action. There's no compensatory patterns going on in the upper torso where I'm leaning my torso forward, trying to take some of the energy out of my legs because it sucks. There's no, I'm scratching my nose because it's so hard that I start shaking my hands. There's no, absolutely nothing on the face in terms of emotion. There's so much that goes into what we teach in an extreme isometric, but in reality, it's an extremely, extremely slow eccentric. You are moving so slow that you have to fire fast twitch to move that slow.
And I will say this, it's funny how a lot of this, like, I had really bad plantar fasciitis and I ruptured my plantar fascia. I've dealt with it for 2 years, finally overcame it. To me, actually, what helped me overcome it was the research showed, well, in order to restructure tendons, you need long hold isometrics. And you talk a lot about like tendons being so important. And when I look at the injuries I've had, I tore my bicep tendon that connects to the rotator cuff, like kind of like a slap tear. I tore 60% my patella tendon, my feet, the tendon, the fascia. It's like, that's where I had the injuries with the tendon. And meanwhile, in the gym, I'm just focusing on muscles. Or not just that, that's being mean, I guess. But like, you know, it's like there was a ton of like focus on, hey, let's get your tendons resilient. And I feel like because in your training,
they are
so
driving the
motion
at velocity, right? I mean, if you think about a guy who comes out of Tommy John surgery, they couldn't figure out why after Tommy John surgery, the guy throws it harder. Because we've taken that tendon and we've made it a noodle until it tears. And then they have an operation, they tighten it back up and it's got that elasticity in it. They come out, they're throwing heat. And how does that work? Well, that's how, think about your training is involved in that. I mean, I always tell people when they're in the gym, I always see the guys, I walk into like a regular gym and I see the guys before they bench press, they're over there doing their thing. I'm like, it's like loosening the lug nuts on your car before you drive it. Why the hell would you do that? You know what I mean? If you're interested in strengthening tensile strength, you need reactive work. You need the ability for the brain to use those muscles to stabilize, and then we're going to drive through the tendon, right? And there's a training matrix around that, and people don't get that.
Well, dude, this has been amazing. I do want to respect some of your time here. I have a couple more thoughts. Just from you on your Instagram, you have like a poster of rules, and I just wrote a couple down, and I would love to just like play with them for a second. The first one that I wrote down was, if you need variety, you do not understand training.
The reality of the situation is there's so much you can do with an extreme lunge to create the variety that we think we need. Right? Nobody's doing it correctly. So the more you change certain nuances of how you do it, it's going to stimulate the brain. Just the intent alone, the thought process alone creates a completely different picture for the brain. So when you see people going, I got to change this exercise because I was, if you look at, like I did this experiment, I bench pressed 60 days in a row.
Wow.
And people were like, how the hell did you do that?
What do you mean by that exactly?
I just bench pressed. I just went to the gym and bench pressed. Now, I did different modalities. I did oscillating. I did reactive. I did quick style. I did regular down and up reps. But I bench pressed every day for 60 days. Got stronger. Didn't get hurt. So all that shit that people think about, oh, if you no, you don't. You have to change the thought process in the brain, not what the motion looks like on the outside. That's all voluntary in nature. Change the reflexive component of it.
I don't want to keep diving in. That's amazing. Okay. The second one is muscles do not stretch.
They don't. they either eccentrically elongate or they concentrically contract. Those tendons and ligaments, there's some movement there. And that's the number one injury in this country, tendons and ligaments.
100%. And that's, in that style of training, it was almost like, I remember that lunge position, we'll keep using that as an example. And for those of you who want to know what that looks like, maybe we might actually be able to throw this up as the podcast goes. If not, we'll send them to your page so they can look at it. It almost is like your hip flexor and quad is at it because it's at its max capacity. It's like you're getting, I kind of put it like strength and stretching in the same.
Oh, absolutely.
That they're not, I think so many kids, especially because they have no idea what's like, they don't know where to look.
Right.
They're like, oh, I'm supposed to stretch after practice. And like this idea that these muscles are stretching and then they're relaxed. And like, what do you think about any of that? I mean, when you write muscles do not stretch, obviously there's a scientific explanation.
For it, they are either doing one of two things. They are eccentrically elongating or they're concentrically contracting. Now, you go to stretch them, they're contracting. They're contracting. There's a level of contraction going through there. So you have to, and this is where therapy meets training. Let's see. How can I explain this to you? Okay, when somebody has a trigger point on their back, okay, you go in there and you're pressing, you're like, oh, that hurts, right? So I do this all the time. I'll be like, I have a trigger point. I'm holding on to it with my thumb on their back. I go around to right where it went through their body, and let's say it's on my abs. And I take that tissue and I stimulate it. I contract it. By reciprocal inhibition in Sherrington's law, what does the opposite muscle have to do? If I stimulate a muscle, what's the other muscle have to do?
Relax.
It has to, because somebody in science thought of that, not me, but that's just the world we live in. I stimulate, the opposite relaxes. I tell people, if my bicep contracts, my triceps has to lengthen, right? So I use it for trigger points. Press in, ouch, go right onto the other body, stimulate that tissue. I press again. They're like, you're not in the same spot. I'm like, yeah, I am. Where is it? It's gone. Oh, it's gone because we contracted the tissue that's reciprocal.
You're just like tricking your body.
Well, no. What is a trigger point? It's something that's contractile tissue. We just relaxed it, but we did it neurologically. Most people want to spend time digging that trigger point. Guess what the body's doing? It's getting tighter and tighter and tighter.
Yeah.
That's why when you go in for a massage, sometimes you feel great. Sometimes you go in and you're like, oh shit, they hurt me. They're hitting the wrong stuff at the wrong time. Sometimes they do it right.
Okay, last couple here.
This is going to get in a real big rabbit hole.
Yeah, no, and I would love to. I really do want to respect your time, and I got to leave in a little bit.
We'll do it again.
Yeah, I would love that. One of them you wrote down, one of the rules was, are you a mouth breather? And then learn to breathe. And I found this one particularly interesting because I'm currently reading a book called Breath by James Nestor. I'm sure maybe you've heard of it or read it. And now I'm like, and I've been super into the different breathing styles and as someone who like snores, and I got this book, and I actually, last night was the first night I tried sleeping with I had like some kinesio tape around my mouth, like
mouth to mouth.
I do breath work with an app called State. And I'm trying so hard to relearn how to breathe. And what it taught me is like, I am a mouth breather. Like, why do you have that on your rules? Why is that even important?
Because everybody's a mouth breather. 80% of the population, maybe more, I don't know, are mouth breathers. That creates inflammation. It just does. I mean, we're designed to breathe through our nose, not through our mouth. So teaching people how to breathe and control their breath is probably one of the most undertrained things in this country. The book, The Oxygen Advantage, is probably one of the first books that was out there that kind of really exposed people to nasal breathing. But, all this breath work that we do in yoga and all this other stuff, and take a deep breath, inhale through your nose, exhale through your mouth. No, inhale through your nose, then exhale through your nose. That's what we're designed to do. So if you can get really good at nasal breathing, then reflexively stuff is going to begin to happen because your brain stem, all that stuff is regulated through your breath work.
And what does that look like in your training? When you wrote it down as a rule, like how do you apply that to your athletes?
So I'll if we're walking through the gym, I'm telling you, you're a mouth breather. We're just giving corrections. And then specifically, sometimes we'll build it into a program to where if we're doing isometrics, we're doing a breathing count to it.
Hmm.
If we're training, we have tape on our mouth. Okay. So one of our warm-ups for our football team was they all came out, they grabbed a piece of tape, boom, put it on, and we warmed up nasal breathing.
Hmm.
So we'll work it in a variety of different ways.
You know, I remember one time trying to do that, and I was doing some like post conditioning kind of interval stuff for like 6 minutes or 8 minutes or whatever.
Yeah, yeah,
And I
yeah.
remember my guy came up to me and was just like, "What are you doing, dude?" And was trying to describe to me this concept that like your reason you're breathing through your mouth is like you need oxygen. Your body needs
Yeah.
oxygen. So like that's why you have to. What do you think? I mean, maybe you're
Well,
not like.
I think it's a threat, right? So so the amygdala controls that in your brain. So when you feel like you need that oxygen, you're going to open your mouth and right. But if you can train those states through nasal breathing, now I'm not saying you do your conditioning breathing just through your nose because that's going to take a period of time to train up to. But the more you breathe through your nose and can control your breathing, like I do with my son right now is once he does any long running in lacrosse or does anything where his breath rate is, I tell him try to focus on getting your heart rate down and controlling your breathing as quickly as possible
Mm-hmm.
because that's what we want. That's what makes an efficient athlete. So your volleyball exchanges, your heart rate's going to go up. Your heart rate's going to go up, and then it's okay. They're getting ready to serve. Can I bring it right back down and do it all over again? And can I do that over and over and over again? I think nasal breathing helps teach that.
Mm-hmm.
Controlling heart rate, controlling that threat response of when my mouth starts to open and I'm gasping, a whole bunch of other neurological things are happening for your brain to protect. Ooh, shit, I might die soon if I run out of breath.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, do you have to open your mouth? Yes. Yes. There is a threat response to that. And you're going to open your mouth and you're going to breathe because you do need the oxygen. However, there's a training part to that.
Mm-hmm. And this kind of leads into the last one, which you had written, make time for yourself. And I thought this was
Yep.
great because we see and this is, they join together really well because we see so many athletes finish practice, do a little stretching. Like in my locker room, I go in the locker room, I see 10 dudes on their phones, just instantly
Yep.
on their phone, and they're driving and they go like, it's constant stimulation. And as I've gotten older, now that I'm, 30, almost 31,
Mm-hmm.
being professional for so long, I started realizing, to your point, it's about, okay, get to a state where you can ramp up and you're ramped up and you're playing volleyball and it's done. The second it's done, I go straight to 5 minutes of box breathing just to like how quickly can I go from sympathetic to parasympathetic? Is that more or less
Yep.
the idea?
That's it. Yep.
Yeah. Like how quickly can I make that transformation? Like, why is that so important? And why is it so important for you? I mean, you wrote this and I can imagine you work with a variety of, all the way from like kids to professional level athletes. Like, why is this a rule for you?
I wrote that thing probably 30 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, right? So some of the stuff on there, and we put it up there as a joke, but the reality is I believed all those things at one point.
Yeah, people, we
Now,
evolve. Obviously, you're not
yeah,
tied to every rule, and of course,
right. So part of it is just the way we breathe and the way we recover. I, kids don't do that anymore. They just don't. They're constantly being stimulated constantly. That's why people don't sleep anymore. They're so stimulated by this blue light phenomena that it's killing people. Killing people. So the first thing I ask athletes all the time is, how do you sleep? And most people that come in the gym and they start with us, they're like, I don't sleep. I'm up on my phone. I go to bed at 2. I get up for school. I'm like, wait, what are you doing? You want to come in here and make yourself better? You can't even sleep correctly. So that's another thing with the extreme isometrics. You said it with the ARP. All of a sudden, you'll start sleeping better. I think that's a part of the training too, is being able to recover to the same extent you train. People don't spend enough time on it.
Wow. And as a professional now, who's been doing this for a long enough time, your ability to recover, and that doesn't just mean, people get it twisted where it's like, oh, I just throw on a Normatec and then I'll like,
Right.
go on my phone and go on TikTok or something. It's like, no. Your ability to, I think it's called like eyes open. I don't know. There's a word for it where it's like, you're not asleep, but you're at
REM.
that level. Well,
Right.
you're not asleep, but your eyes are either open or closed, but you're doing nothing. Like there's no
Right.
stimulation, but you're not asleep, basically.
Right.
Like that amount of restorative recovery is
Hmm.
so big because that's what it's about, especially as you get older. It's like how quickly can you get into a recovered state? And that people have it, I think people have it twisted in my industry where it's like recovery is just like I take a massage gun and just drill it into me and then I go back
Right.
on, it's like
Right.
it's so much more than that. And the best part I think about this is like it's a free tool. Like you said, like breath, it's free. you
Yeah.
know, like for so many kids out there who are like, oh, I can't afford and all these different things. Like so many of these things are just like they're bringing you back to like how we were designed. We weren't designed to stare at our phones for however long. We weren't designed to just breathe through our mouths and snore all the time. Like
Right.
so.
And then
I just
the other thing we do for recovery is we'll put on a pair of headphones, and I send every kid that plays football for me. Um, like we have the Benedictine monks chant, right? So it goes in their earphones. They take their shoes off, barefoot, walking in grass.
mm,
And the kids are like, this is crazy. No, this is normal. This is
mm,
exactly what we should have been doing after we went hunting to get our food or whatever we were doing. There's no
mm,
downtime. So walk around, and that's what I tell them, walk around for 20 minutes. They're like, oh, coach, that's so long. I'm like, just relax and walk. Just
mm.
walk. Grass is wet. We're walking barefoot, and we're restoring the electrons. The frequency is just bringing us back parasympathetically because we were almost in a car accident on Friday night in a football game, right? That's what
Wow.
happens. You're so amped up. Do you ever come down?
Mm.
Most don't.
Dude, this has been so amazing, Dan. No, for real. I really couldn't begin to express how much I appreciate feeling like I'm finally getting some more answers. I'm going to continue to
Yep.
follow what you do. And for everyone listening, like I know you have a Patreon, your Instagram,
Yep.
like please use this time to just like get people involved in what you're doing.
Yeah, it's rather cheap. I mean, they can pay a certain monthly fee, and then we're going through all these things. And then people write me questions, I answer them, and off we go.
Yeah, where can they
You know,
find it?
WannaGetFast.org or our Instagram at WannaGetFast, my Twitter at WannaGetFast or at WGF1. Yeah, Twitter's been nice. I've been able to post some stuff on Twitter, but my
Nice.
guys take care of Instagram, and we get it going pretty good.
Nice.
Yeah.
Dude, this has been fantastic. I really do appreciate your time, man.
Oh, you bet, man. You
Thank you
bet. Good
so
luck
much.
this season. Good luck.
I appreciate it, bro.
All right, brother.
All
We'll
right.
talk
Thanks for
soon.
being on. See ya.
All right. Bye-bye.